ahead and run the whole film. As a matter of fact, before we do that, I'm going to address this right at the beginning. Now, for those of you, again, that have seen 9/11 in plain sight, raise your hand. Okay, most of you have. How many of you have been looking on the internet and checking out all the information, the 9/11 truth org, all the 9/11 stuff, okay? How many of you have heard all of the infighting and backbiting and bickering and backstabbing and all that kind of stuff? How many of you have heard that there are certain topics that you shouldn't talk about that are going to distract and take away from the real important issues? Okay. How many of you folks have heard that, of course, when Dave Unitarian came out with 9/11 in plain sight, he was putting out doctored photographs and misinformation, and it was taking away from all the real important stuff. How many heard that argument? Bunch of you. Okay. Well, what's going to happen, for those of you that listen to the radio broadcast, you know that I use think outside the cage. Cage, that's right. Most say, folks, thinks outside the box. Boxes are traditionally made out of cardboard. And you can bust out of a box real easy. But busting out of a cage is a little different. And I guarantee you, the powers that be are working 24/7, 365, manufacturing cages to keep the brains in. Okay? They don't want you to think for yourself. They're going to tell you what to think and what to accept and what is right and what is wrong, etc., etc. But they're doing so in such a way to help you think that you're doing it by yourself. Okay? I don't play that game. If somebody tells me not to talk about a particular issue, I'm going to talk about it twice as much. So you shouldn't talk about flashes and pods because if you don't know what they are, you shouldn't talk about it. I say, wait a second. How can we ever know what it is unless we talk about it? You see what I'm saying? This is the thinking inside the cage. Now, I know that after the film runs, we'll have a Q&A, and there are several questions that I'm sure that will be brought up that are the same questions that I hear everywhere we go. So, before we start the film, I'm going to do a little bit of audience participation. Right? And this is the first exercise in thinking outside the cage. Now, as far as I'm aware right now, when it comes to the issue of the flash of the pod, there's only myself and I believe Phil Jahan that is stuck to our guns on this issue. The first edition of Loose Change, when it came out, that was the very first thing that was in that video, you may recall. He talked about the flash and the pod, and a month later they came out with the second edition and took it out. The reason that they explained was that they didn't have enough time to keep it in the film. Now, I know personally the type of pressure that I came upon after In Plain Sight came out about this flash and pod. I had all kinds of people contact me, take it out, you're going to destroy the entire 9/11 truth movement. If you don't take it out, you're going to discredit everybody. Take it out. And if you don't take it out, you must be a government agent. Okay, well, I'm not taking it out. In fact, I went even further, and because of the fact that Joyce is a Gulf War veteran spokesperson and all that, we know a lot of military. Lots of military. So we've been showing it to military for the past 3 or 4 years. Matter of fact, I talked to Doug Rocky. How many folks know Doug Rocky? A lot of you do, okay. He's instrumental with the depleted uranium. He worked with the Pentagon. He was in charge of the field manuals and the development of all the information about depleted uranium. And what's really interesting is he was at a retirement party for a general and in D.C. And they were all sitting there martinis and having their Manhattan and all that kind of stuff. And he walked over to the big screen TV and had a copy of In Plain Sight and popped it in the player and started playing it. And so all of a sudden the party shifted and they're all looking at this footage and they get to the flash and the pod and it's sort of like was a showstopper. Bottom line here is that there are people now looking at this flash and pod in a different way. So I'm going to ask you, before we run the film, how many of you folks, when it comes to the issue of September 11th, we've all heard all the information, we've seen the Larry Silverstein clip about Bullet and all that, how many of you folks believe, and this is mandatory, audience participation is mandatory, all right? How many of you believe that in some way controlled demolitions had something to do with the collapse of the North Tower, the South Tower, and Building 7? How many of you? Now keep your hands up and look around the room. I believe every hand is up. Okay, very good. We have 100%. Okay. No, not 100? I missed somebody. All right, well, we got almost everybody here believes controlled demolitions had something the collapse of the towers. Okay, so now we're going to start thinking outside of the cage. Yesterday morning, was it yesterday morning or Saturday morning? CNN showed us all the collapse of a casino down in Miami where the Rat Pack used to hang out. How many saw that on TV? A bunch of you did. We see collapses all the time, controlled demolitions. Whenever they show that on TV, does a plane have to slam into the building before it comes down? No. No. Okay. So we'll now ask the question, if controlled demolitions, we all agree controlled demolitions had something to do with the collapse of those towers, what role did the planes play? Anybody? Distraction?
Smoke screen.
Smoke screen?
Giving them an excuse to get pissed
Cover
off.
story, diversion. Okay, that's it. Okay. So does everybody agree with that? Raise your hands. Okay, most of you. Okay. All right. So if we can all pretty much agree that the planes were a distraction, a diversion, a smoke screen, a cover story. All right. Now we have to ask you, if these planes were hijacked by, Muhammad Atta, Ali Hanjour, all the rest of them, if these planes were hijacked planes, common sense would dictate that there are only two possible connections between the hijackers and the controlled demolitions. Possibility number one, the hijackers got into the North Tower and the South Tower and Building 7 weeks ahead of time, and they were planting charges, and they were wiring the whole thing. And they were wiring the whole thing. How many people believe that the hijackers were in Building 7 and North Tower, South Tower, planting charges weeks ahead of time? Anybody? Raise your hand. Look around. Okay, so the hijackers didn't plant the charges. All right, so the only other possibility is that gloriously, those wacky terrorists just happened to hijack planes and slam them into buildings that were scheduled for demolition just minutes later. Anybody believe it was a coincidence? Okay, so if it couldn't have been a coincidence, and if the hijackers couldn't have gotten into Building 7 or the North Tower or the South Tower to plant the charges, well then how in God's green earth could those planes have been hijacked planes? Is there any evidence that indicates that the planes that hit the towers in New York City were not hijacked planes? Enter the flash and the pod. All of a sudden, all the folks that have been cleaving onto the controlled demolition issue, which I cleave onto as well, realize that the flash and the pod issue doesn't distract or take away or discredit all the good information about controlled demolitions, but in fact, it supports the contention that there were controlled demolitions that took down the towers. So we're not fighting one another here. I never was fighting it. I don't want to fight with anybody. I grew up in the 60s. Peace, love, man. Make love, not war. That's the kind of guy that I really am. But the bottom line here is that there are some folks that want us like this. Because divided we fall. But anyway, I wanted to get that point out in the beginning here, because I know that there are some folks that are still having a hard time with this flash and the pod issue and the concept that those planes couldn't have been hijacked planes. Because if they weren't hijacked planes, that means that the entire war on terror is an absolute fraud. And we as Americans have allowed our government, that's supposed to be good people, to launch a war, or shall I say 2 wars, half a world away, and kill nearly 1 million innocent men, women, and children, and contaminate the entire region with depleted uranium for 4.5 billion freaking years. We should be ashamed of ourselves. Not you, but collectively. We're apathetic, or complacent, or comfortable, or whatever, to do what needs to be done. I certainly hope we do have a Ron Paul revolution, because across the country in the past 6 months with all the people we've talked to, they say if we don't have a Ron Paul revolution, we may end up with the other kind. And that's not what anybody wants. But with that, I just wanted to get that flash and pod issue out into the open so that now, do this. Now we can kill the lights, and let's see, where would it be? That's it. Here we go.